Hello, my name is Ibrahim Osman Adam. Welcome to today's session on case study research. Case study research is one of the most fascinating approaches in qualitative research. This is part of our broader discussion on qualitative research methods, and I'm happy to share this topic with you today. First, let me explain why case studies are so powerful in research. Imagine you are trying to understand how a successful startup went from 0 to billion CD valuation. Rather than just looking at numbers, a case study will let us dig deep into the how and the why. And some of the issues that we would be concerned about in this instance will be the decisions that are made, the challenges faced, and the strategies that worked. Key points we will cover today include trying to understand exactly what case study research approach is. When should you choose case study as your research method? The different types of case studies, either looking at it from the angle of either single against multiple, explanatory against exploratory. And then we'll also look at how to design a robust case study. Then we'll also look at the common pitfalls to avoid. And then we'll look at maybe, if we have time, some real world examples. The beauty of case study research is that it gives us rich, detailed insights that other methods might miss. Think of it as the difference between looking at a photograph versus watching a full documentary. You would see that both are valuable, but they tell different kinds of stories. I encourage you to think about potential case studies in your own research areas as we go through this. Let's start by looking at the bigger picture of how case studies fit into the research landscape. What you are seeing here is essentially the research pyramid. The research pyramid basically shows us how everything in research builds upon each other from bottom to the top. Starting at the foundation, we have the philosophical assumptions. You should think of these as the bedrock of your research. And these are your fundamental beliefs about how knowledge is created and understood. These assumptions will guide everything else you do. And then moving up, we have the research methods, which we have discussed in our previous sessions. And then we also have data collection. As part of today's session, our focus will be on case study as one of the research method approaches. But it is important that we understand that when we are talking about case studies can be considered in terms of either it being a teaching case study or a research case study. But our emphasis in this particular session is concerned with the use of case studies for the purposes of research. In this session, in this slide, we are trying to clarify the key differences between teaching cases and research cases. And trust me, this distinction is important for your understanding of case study research. Let's start with teaching cases. You are probably familiar with this form of case studies because these are the types that you use in business classrooms. So they are specifically crafted for students, and also their main purpose is to help you apply theories and principles you have learned in class into real world scenarios. Then if you look at other differences too, in terms of research cases, they are primarily written for researchers, and then teaching cases are usually designed to illustrate an existing theory or principle, whilst research cases are designed to contribute to a new theory or explore or test an existing theory. Now, let's dive deeper into our specific focus, which is research cases, and how we can apply them in a fascinating way. There are two main ways we use research cases, and each serves a distinct purpose. First, we have what we call exploratory research. Think of this as being like a detective. You are venturing into probably a relatively unknown territory to discover new insights. For example, if you were studying how startups are emerging in developing countries using social media, well, you might use an exploratory case study because there isn't much existing theory about the context. Then we have explanatory research, which can be used in three ways: to test existing theories in new contexts, to explain why certain phenomena occur, or to compare different situations or organizations. Let me give you a real-world example. Imagine you are studying why some family businesses successfully transition to the next generation while others fail. An explanatory case study will help you test existing succession theories, explain the mechanisms behind successful transitions, or even compare successful transitions with unsuccessful ones. Now, here's what makes case study research in business and management so powerful. It's all about real people in real organizations. When we're dealing with case studies, we are not dealing with abstract theories or hypothetical situations. We are looking at actual decisions, real challenges, and then maybe genuine outcomes. So this empirical evidence, this real world data we are talking about in case studies is what allows us to make original contributions to knowledge. Now, let's unpack what we really mean when we talk about case studies. You know, it's interesting. The term case study particularly is actually more complex than many people will realize. First, we need to understand that case study has got several meanings, multiple meanings. Sometimes it can refer to an in-depth study of a single organization. It can lead to the in-depth study of a single organization, or sometimes maybe just a situation. For instance, like when someone does a detailed study of how Toyota develops maybe its lean manufacturing systems. Other times, it may describe an entire research method with its own principles and procedures. Okay, now let me introduce you to Robert Yin. Robert Yin is one of the most influential thinkers in case study research, and his definition is particularly useful because it highlights two critical aspects. First, he emphasizes that case studies investigate contemporary phenomena in their real context. Think about studying a merger between maybe, say, two companies as it is happening. When you look at it, you are just looking at real events unfolding in real time. And then we have a second scenario, and this is more crucial. Yin also points out that case studies are especially valuable when the boundaries between what we are studying and this context are blurry. For example, if you are studying how corporate culture affects innovation, can you really separate the culture from everything else that's happening in the organization? This will be something that will be very difficult to do. Interestingly, if you look at Yin's approach, you realize that Yin is fundamentally a positivist. And what does this mean? It means that he suggests using hypotheses and propositions in his research, and that if we want to adopt his definition, possibly we may be using hypotheses and proposition, which will mean that we'll be adopting a much more positivist approach to be able to test the different ideas we have about different phenomena. Next, let's get really clear about what makes a business case study different from other types of research. That first definition we looked at is packed with important elements, which I think we need to have a look at. So let's break it down. The first part is the part regarding empirical evidence. When we say empirical evidence, it means we are dealing with real observable data and not just theories or assumptions. So when you are studying an organization, you are looking at actual events, decisions, and what? And outcomes. Then what's also particularly interesting is the emphasis on multiple sources of evidence. So think about it like building a legal case. You don't just rely on one witness, right? In business case studies, while interviews and documents are our main sources, you might also look at financial reports, maybe observation, and maybe company emails or even social media presence. So I find it interesting that in business and management research, we almost always focus on organizations. Why? We always almost do that because organizations are where business theories come to life practically. They are our living laboratories as business researchers, if you will. Now, here's something really important about case study research that often surprises many people. Case study research is incredibly flexible in terms of research philosophy. So it means that you can approach it from a positivist perspective, an interpretivist perspective, or even a critical viewpoint. So, for example, let's say you are studying innovation in a technological company. A positivist approach might measure patent outputs. An interpretivist approach might explore how employees understand and experience innovation, whilst a critical realist approach might examine who gets to define what counts as innovation and then maybe why. Now, case studies have some distinct characteristics, and let's take a moment to look at some of them. Now, the first one we want to look at is case studies having a particularistic focus. Now, to understand this, you have to think of it as using case study as using a magnifying glass. What we are basically doing with case study is that we are zooming in on specific situations or events. So, for example, instead of studying change management in general, you might want to focus on how a particular company handled a major, say, digital transformation. The second characteristic is what we refer to as rich or thick description. This is where case studies really shine. When we're dealing with case studies, we are not just collecting surface level data. We're diving deep into the context. So imagine you are studying maybe a Starbucks entry into a particular geographical area. You would want to understand not just the business decisions, but you would also want to understand the cultural context, the consumer behavior, and maybe the local market conditions that may have influenced those decisions. Then we have the third characteristic, which is the fact that case studies have a heuristic quality. When we say heuristic quality, the term heuristic should not intimidate us. It simply means that case studies help to eliminate our understanding about phenomena. They help us to have those moments that we will say, hey, this is what I mean. So they present to us a moment when we can understand why things happened the way they did. The heuristic quality also ensures that we know or we bring completely new perspectives to light. Then the fourth concept or characteristic we want to highlight is what we refer to as the bounded system. This is very crucial, and you need to know where your case study starts and end. Every case study must have a beginning and an end. It's like drawing a line around your research subject. So if you are studying, say, maybe Netflix content management strategy, you need to decide, are you looking at a specific time period, a particular market, specific types of content, and many, many other issues. And then finally, there's this issue about multiple data sources, which we have already talked about. We have multiple data sources, the use of multiple data sources when we are dealing with case studies. And this is also where the issue of triangulation comes into play, which means gathering evidence from different angles to build a stronger case. So with case studies, we could interview employees, we could use company documentation, observe meetings, use internal surveys, and even public statements that have been made. We can use all of these multiple sources as part of case studies. Now, let's look at the types of case studies. Let's dive into the types. The first one I want us to look at is exploratory case studies. Exploratory case studies are particularly exciting because they are all about venturing into new territories. If you want to study something new, that's when you use what? Exploratory research. It's used in terms of discovering other than what? Other than testing. It's used for discovering other than testing. When you are using this particular type of case study, you are discovering new insights and patterns. So this type of research is perfect when you are dealing with emerging phenomena or situations where there isn't enough existing theory to form a very solid hypothesis. So if you look carefully at the example on the slide, stating how organizations are adapting to artificial intelligence, something like this. Why do you think this could be a good exploratory case? It can be a good exploratory case because the technology and its business applications are rapidly evolving in terms of artificial intelligence, and organizations are still trying to figure out how to integrate AI effectively. Also, there's limited existing theory about organizational AI adoption patterns. And so a study like this will give us an example to explore the phenomena in a real life context. Then we have the second type, descriptive case study. One of the most powerful tools in business research is the use of descriptive case studies, because descriptive case studies, we can look at it in terms of the detail it provides. When we are using descriptive case studies, we are documenting every significant aspect of a business phenomena. We are documenting everything. So let's understand this through both maybe global and local examples. So let's look at an example I've given before. If you look at Toyota's lean manufacturing system as a classic example, where researchers meticulously maybe can use that to document how systems were implemented, each step of the process, the relationship between the different parts, and the role of different stakeholders. Maybe we can use a local example. Let's bring this closer to home. Imagine doing a descriptive case study of a local business like Farm Milk Ghana, and their distribution network. You would want to actually map out how products move from the factory to the consumer, and the role of the different distributors and vendors in the value chain. You may also be looking at the timing and the scheduling systems they are using, how they handle challenges like power outages or transportation issues. Then we have another type, an explanatory case study. Explanatory case study. Now, for explanatory case studies, this is where we really get into the why of a business phenomena, the why. As indicated on the slide, we are looking for cause and effect when we are dealing with what? Explanatory case studies. When we are dealing with explanatory case studies. So for instance, a typical example could be, why did Netflix succeed in an environment with streaming while Blockbuster failed in that same environment? Now, we can also look at case studies by looking at it from different dimensions. We can also classify it in terms of number. So we can look at single case studies versus what? Multiple case studies. And that choice is also very important, whether we want to focus on a single case or examine multiple cases. Both approaches have their place, but they serve different purposes. So let's start with single case studies. For single case studies, they are perfect when you are dealing with something unique or something revelatory, something that really stands out clearly. Then we also have multiple case studies. And multiple case studies, here you are looking at quite a number of things. You are looking for patterns, and then maybe it will give you the opportunity to be able to what? To be able to compare. So when you want to compare and contrast, then you rely on multiple case studies. But if you want to, the case you are looking at is very unique or revelatory, you may use a single case study. We also have what we refer to as intrinsic and instrumental cases. Let's explore that as another fascinating distinction when we are dealing with case study research. Let's look at the first one, intrinsic case studies. Here, we're interested in the case itself. It's like being fascinated by a great story for its own sake. Like, for instance, if we take the case of Amazon, and then we ask a question like, how did Amazon become so dominant? We are studying Amazon because Amazon itself is fascinating, and we want to know what unique decisions they made. How did they grow from an online bookstore to a global giant? And then maybe something like what made their journey so special. The other type is instrumental cases. Now, when case studies can help us to understand something else, we will refer to those cases as being what? Instrumental. In this case, we are using the case as a tool to understand something much bigger than we are looking at. Now, if you look at the use of case studies generally, it is important that I remind you about the pioneers who really shaped how we think about case studies and how case studies has been conducted over the years. Three scholars have each brought something unique. And these three scholars are Robert Yin, Robert Stake, and then Sharon Merriam. So, and I've already indicated in terms of the first one, I've integrated Yin, especially his profound definition of what a case study is. So for Yin, we can say that Yin is really the architect of modern case study research. What makes Yin special is his systematic approach. And then you also have to think of him as providing the blueprint for how to conduct rigorous case studies, despite the fact that his orientation is positivist, which means that he uses a systematic data collection approach. He uses clear research protocols, employs hypothesis testing in order to achieve measurable outcome. Then there's also Robert Stake, who takes a completely different approach from Yin. Whilst Yin takes a systematic methodology, Robert Stake takes a naturalistic approach, and Robert Stake is an interpretivist, whilst Yin is a positivist. Then we have the last one, we have Sharon, who really bridges the gap between theory and practice. And she is particularly known for making case study research practical and accessible. And she applies case study methods, especially in educational settings, and provides a clear and actionable guidelines for us to be able to conduct case study research. Now, moving on, I want us to explore what makes a research question perfect for case study research. This is crucial because choosing the right type of question can make or break your case study. First, notice our emphasis. The slide indicates that the how and why questions matter. How and why questions. These are the bread and butter of case studies, the type of questions we ask. For example, if we ask a question like, how did Uber disrupt traditional taxi industry? Or maybe, why did some retailers thrive during the pandemic whilst others failed? When we talk about contemporary phenomena, in fact, we are looking at things happening right now. We are looking at things happening right now or in the recent past. And this is where case studies really shine. Because in dealing with contemporary phenomena, the events are still fresh in our minds. People involved can be interviewed, documents and data are accessible, and the context we are looking at is also very, very relevant. And then we also have the issue of complex situations. Complex situations are perfect for case studies. They are perfect for case studies because they involve multiple factors and then stakeholders. And then we also have the issue of limited control over events. When we are using case studies, this aspect is actually very interesting. Unlike experiments in laboratories where you can control the variables, case studies examine real-world situations as they unfold. And this is perfect when studying market reactions to new products, leadership transitions, digital innovations, and what have you. And then last but not the least, finally, the need for a deep contextual understanding is also very crucial. And case studies allow us to dig deeper into environments in which decisions are made, relationship between different actors, and maybe the underlying motivators. Now, based on all of this, I want us to go a little bit back to try and understand how we can identify case study opportunities for the purpose of our research. And there are three fascinating things we have to consider when identifying case study opportunities. We explore three. The first one we will start with is if the case is unique or revelatory. So for instance, if you look at the fall of the Lehman Brothers during the 2008 financial crisis, why do you think this particular case is unique or revelatory? Why? Because we were presented with unprecedented access to company documents and access to key players. So in that case, that will be a perfect opportunity for a case study. We could also look at it in terms of its critical nature. Critical cases are also something we can use because they are perfect for testing theories about competitive advantage and many other things. Then we also have representative cases, which can help us to understand patterns in a particular situation or phenomenon. Then apart from that, The issue of longitudinality is also very important when we are looking at a case study. It also offers unique insights into organizational change over time in terms of our research development. So, for instance, if you look at the case of, say, Microsoft, that's an excellent example because it shows how steady change over time can reveal deep insights about what an organization is doing. Then we also have instances where case study opportunities can be identified would be in issues of considering the pilot studies. If we're doing pilot studies, we can also use case studies for that. And then, yeah, case studies come with quite a number of advantages. They come with quite a number of advantages, some of which are the deep contextual insights it will provide. It provides us with rich data, providing us with the opportunity to build theory. Then it's also flexible. There's flexibility in terms of data collection when we are using case study. And that's a very practical advantage because the flexibility comes from what? It comes from the fact that you can conduct interviews, you can analyze documents, you can make observations, you can use combined approaches in terms of your data collection. And then finally, its holistic nature. Case studies provide holistic understanding, which means that you get to see everything, how everything is fitting together. Despite these advantages, case studies do have some limitations. So, for instance, time and resource intensity. Case studies are time and resource intensive. Think about it this way. When you are conducting an in-depth interview, it can take a lot of time. When you are analyzing documents, it can be labor intensive. Then another limitation is the issue of access challenges. Access challenges can be a real headache. You might face reluctant organizations or participants. You may also even have confidentiality concerns or limited access to what key documents. Sometimes too, when you want to interview people, it may be difficult scheduling because the executives you want to interview may have very busy schedules. Apart from that, there's also the issue of generalizability. The generalizability concerns are particularly important because we will keep asking the question, can findings from one particular case study apply to others? And how representative is the case study? So the issue of generalizability is one. Then there's also the issue of bias. Researcher bias is something. The potential bias of researchers is something we need to be very mindful about when we are dealing with case study research, especially when the case study is a positive one. And then last but not the least, the issue of what? The issue of data overload. Data overload is really a challenge because when you interview quite a lot of people, you have mountains of interview transcripts to look at, countless documents to analyze, and then multiple perspectives to consider. And this can be very complex, and sometimes a lot of things can be very difficult to untangle. Then let's explore how case studies can help us play a role. What role can case studies play in theory building and testing? Case studies have a dual role: to test theories and then to build theories in business research. So the first one, let's start with the theory building. Think of this as constructing a new understanding of how things work. In terms of theory building, the focus should be on pattern identification. And pattern identification is like being a detective. You are looking for recurring patterns or recurring themes in your data, and then trying to spot the connections between events. Still under theory building, we also have what we call proposition development. And proposition development moves us from patterns to what? Potential explanations. And then the other one is the model construction. And model construction is where we put it all together to build a framework to explain what we have found. Then the second rule is theory testing. When we are talking about theory testing, this is where we examine whether the theories hold up. And then here, we may have to conduct critical case analysis, which will involve selecting cases that can really test our theories. And then proposition testing, which means systematically examining our theoretical statements, and then we also have what we refer to as model refinement, which is about making our theories better, adjusting the models based on evidence, fine-tuning the theoretical relationships, and adding any other nuance that can help to ensure our understanding. Okay, now we have looked at the philosophical foundations of whatever we are doing in research in earlier sessions. Here, I want us to dive into the philosophical foundations that underpin case study research. This may sound a bit abstract, but I will try to make it practical and relevant to your research. So first, let's explore the issue of ontology. Ontology basically refers to the nature of reality in research. And this is fascinating because it affects everything we do as researchers. So when we ask a question like, is there one objective reality? We are virtually just asking, can we find a universal truth in business? Does management strategy that works in one context work in all other contexts? Here, our focus is in terms of what reality is. Then we move to the second one, which actually talks about how we get to know what we know. And that is what we refer to as the nature of knowledge, or epistemology. Now, our philosophical assumptions will have research implications in terms of our choice of research questions, the approach to our evidence, and the way we even interpret our findings. So the first one I want us to look at in terms of this philosophical dimension is the positivist approach in terms of case studies. So we're going to talk about positivist approach to case studies, particularly focusing on Yin's influential work. And I already indicated that Yin being a positivist means that his approach to case studies is what? Very systematic. Data collection is also very systematic. This approach is really important because a good design can make or break our case study research. But Yin gives us 5 essential components when we are looking at positivist case studies. And I'll show you how each one matters in our discussion. So the first one Yin talks about is that the study questions are our foundation. The questions are our foundation. And our research questions need to be clear and focused. We need to be clear and focused. We typically will start our research questions with what? How or why. So for example, we may ask a question like, how did company X successfully implement digital transformations? Then we also have the second one, Yin's mentioned in his framework, is what? Propositions. Propositions are our educated guesses. These are specific things we expect to find. They guide our data collection. A typical example may be, for instance, senior leadership support is crucial for successful digital transformation. Then the third one we need to look at in his framework is what? Unit of analysis. The unit of analysis defines exactly what we are studying. Either it is the entire organization, a specific department, or a particular decision or process. And then the fourth one is the logic. The logic links the data to the propositions. And we should be able to understand how our evidence will support or challenge the proposition. And then the fifth one is the criteria for interpreting our findings. How would you know if your propositions are supported? What makes evidence strong or weak? And how would you handle conflicting evidence? So for positive cases, we should always be guided by these 5 components of a good case study design. Now, in terms of positivist cases, I need to remind you that when we are talking about positivist cases, we have to understand that what we mean by reality is objective and it is observable. So in positivist research, we believe that there are concrete facts we can measure and that business phenomena can be observed and documented. We also believe that knowledge comes from empirical verifications. And researchers are not part of the research. Researchers remain detached and they are what? They are neutral. And when we are also talking about positivist foundations in terms of positivist cases, the emphasis is on the what? Causality and generalization. The emphasis on causality and generalization is important because we want to understand what causes what. We also want to be able to find patterns that apply beyond our specific case. We also want to be able to understand that. Now, let me touch briefly in terms of briefly on validity and reliability when we are talking about positivist cases. So think about these two things as the checkpoints for a rigorous research. Construct validity. Construct validity is about measuring what you actually intend to measure. That's what it means. You have to ask the question whether your operational measures are appropriate. For example, if you are studying innovation, are you measuring patents? Are you measuring new products or something else? The key to this particular construct validity thing is having clear, proper measures that truly represent your concepts. And then we also have what we call internal validity. Internal validity basically establishes causal relationships. For instance, a question like, can you confidently say that A leads to B? And then have you ruled out alternative explanations? Then also the issue of external validity is there, which deals with the issue of what? Generalizability or generalization. Then we also have reliability. Reliability is about replication. Would another researcher get similar results following our research methods? Now, the next one I want us to look at is interpretivist cases. So let's explore interpretive cases, which offer a fascinating contrast to the positivist approach we just discussed. So this approach is all about understanding how people make sense of their world. When we say interpretivist studies focus on meanings that people assign, we are basically saying things about how employees interpret organizational stuff, organizational changes, what customers believe about a brand. All these constructions about people are very, very important when we are dealing with interpretivist cases. Okay. So let's give a practical example. Imagine you are studying a company merger. So in that instance, a positivist approach might measure integration metrics, what can be used to measure the integration, whilst a positivist approach will try to explore how employees understand and experience the merger. Okay. So as indicated already, interpretivist case studies focus largely on the social construction of reality. And this is about how and why people see the world the way they see it. Then we have interpretivist cases, as I've indicated, reality is socially constructed. Then when we are talking about interpretivist cases too, we are talking about the issue of what? Multiple interpretations. Multiple reality is seen to exist. Now, the last part we want to look at is the issue of critical cases. Critical case studies take a unique and a thought-provoking approach. That's the approach they take. This approach taken by critical case studies challenges us to look beneath the surface. And then it emphasizes that we should always try to question what we often will take for granted. And what makes critical case studies distinctive is their focus on questioning assumptions. Critical case studies will always question assumptions. They always question assumptions. So when we are talking about critical case studies, there are four key elements that make them unique and powerful tools for business research. The first one is power and equality focus. The power and equality focus and inequality focus is central. And we need to be able to examine who has decision-making authority in regarding a particular situation. We need to look at the resource distribution and many other things. Then there's also the issue of transformative goals. Then historical and structural context. And then last but not the least, participant empowerment. Okay. Now, let's talk about the essential elements of designing a case study, a case study research project. Think of case study research design as your blueprint. I want you to think of it as your blueprint because it needs to be carefully planned, but it must also be flexible enough to adopt as your study changes or as you progress either during your PhD or during your MPhil. But here are the key elements you need to consider. The first one is the research question development. Your research questions must be clear and focused. They should align with your case study methodology And often they start with what, how, or why. And then we also have the case selection. You must be very purposeful about the case you are selecting, and you have to justify it. You could be using a single case or multiple case. You have to justify. And you have to align it with what? Your research objectives. You also have to consider accessibility. Will you have access to the organization? Will you have access to the participants? Then the third one is planning your data collection. Are you collecting your data through multiple sources? Are you using interviews, observations, or documents? And then the fourth one is the analysis framework. How are you going to analyze your data? How are you going to organize your data? How are you going to code it? What will be your coding strategies? Then the last one is maybe quality assurance measures. In terms of the quality assurance measures, think about the triangulation strategies you want to employ. How are you going to check some other procedures? Will this be peer reviewed? Will it be peer reviewed for you? There are a lot of things you have to consider. So for instance, if you are studying organizational change, your research questions may be, as indicated here, how do established companies implement digital transformation? So your case study selection may be maybe 3 or 4 companies at different stages. Your data collection may be interviews, documents, and maybe observation. And your analysis may be thematic coding or maybe pattern matching or something. And then your quality assurance framework may be using multiple data sources, participant observation, and then what have you. Okay. Now, as we draw closer to the end of the session, I want us to explore purposive sampling strategies. Let's explore these 5 purposive sampling strategies. You have to note that each serve a different research goal. And so understanding these strategies will help you to choose the right approach for your case study. So for instance, assuming you want to use typical case sampling, this one usually focuses on what's normal or average. So that's a typical case sampling. It helps you to understand the standard situations, and it shows what's typical in the given context. So for example, if you want to study a mid-sized company standard onboarding process, you could use a typical case sampling. Then we also have critical case sampling, which looks at cases that make a point dramatically, and they are often used to test theories whilst providing logical generalization. Then we also have what we refer to as maximum variation sampling. And here it is used to capture diverse perspectives and shows different dimensions of an issue and can help us to identify common patterns across differences. Then we have also extreme case sampling, which focuses on unusual or special cases. And extreme case sampling can help us understand boundaries of a phenomenon. And they are often used to reveal new insights. Then we have the last one, convenience sampling. Convenience sampling is based on the ease of access. How easy is it for you to have access? Based on that, it saves time and resources. And the convenience sampling are mostly used often in what? In pilot studies. Now, all case studies will have boundaries. Let's see how to set clear boundaries for your case study. Clear boundaries. There must be clear boundaries for each case study. So if we use Microsoft transformation and Satya Nadella's as an example, setting boundaries is crucial. It's like drawing a map around your research territory. So every case will have a start and an end when we are talking about temporal boundaries. So there will be a start and an end. But when we are talking about spatial boundaries, we will look at it in the context of what? Physical realm and what? Virtual. And then we also have contextual boundaries where we can look at it in terms of either industries, maybe a technology evolution or a market condition. And then the last one is the theoretical boundaries. Theoretical boundaries, interestingly, help us to frame which theories we will use to analyze. What concepts are we going to focus on? And which aspects are we going to exclude? Now, another important aspect we need to consider when we're dealing with case study research is the unit of analysis. Unit of analysis considerations are very, very critical because we have to think of this as deciding which lens we are going to use to examine our case study. Are we looking at it at the individual level? Are we looking at it at the organizational level? the process level or at an event level. This is very, very crucial. Now, importantly, when we are doing case study research, there are some practical aspects we need to consider. And these 4 points are very profound. First, when you want to do a case study research, you have to ensure that you find an interesting case. It's not just about what interests you as a person. The case you are choosing should be able to address a significant business issue. It must have a potential for theoretical contribution. It should be accessible for the research, and it must offer rich learning opportunities. Then you also have to make sure that you yourself, you have good skills, people skills, interpersonal skills, because you'll be interacting with various stakeholders. You need to build trust quickly. You must have, you may be given sensitive information and you need to handle it professionally. The third one is identifying and interviewing key informants. So it's also critical because you see, you have to look for people with direct experience who you can talk to. And then the last part is gathering rich data and trying to establish the context. This particular aspect basically means that you'll be collecting data from multiple sources and you have multiple types of evidence. Understanding them in the broader environment is very important because some of them will involve documenting historical backgrounds, capturing organizational culture and whatnot. When we are doing case study, these 4 points are also very, very critical. All along, we have been talking about the advantages and how good case studies may be used for the purpose of our research. But case studies do have some limitations. First, let's acknowledge that case studies, though are popular, when we use them, some problems may occur. And I think I mentioned some limitations about case studies already, so I will not be repeating this particular session. Now, last but not the least, what would actually make your case study exemplary to study? Let's look at these elements. Each of these elements we are going to look at in this last part contributes in a unique way to creating research that can make what? A real impact. Now, I have been saying that the case studies you choose must be interesting. So when we say a case study must be interesting, it means that it should address significant issues. It should capture people's attention. It should have relevance to theory or practice. Then the case study must also display sufficient evidence, getting data from multiple sources, strong documentation, and clear chain of evidence. And then the third one, the case study must be complete. If it is complete, it means all relevant aspects are covered. There are no loose ends. And then we also have the case study must consider alternative perspectives. It must consider different viewpoints. The case study should be written in an engaging manner, not just as it is. You have to write it in a way that would have a clear narrative flow, a compelling storytelling, so that people, when they read it, they will be able to follow. The case study too should contribute to what? Knowledge. And this is the most important part. Your case study must add something new to what we already know by advancing theory or practice. For instance, if your case study provides useful insights about a particular phenomenon, you will have provided some rich insight into what we already know or what we may not know. Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of our session on case study research. Thank you.